What's up, YouTube? Today, I'm rereading some random stories I found while I explore the Nether in my Minecraft world. Sorry I haven't uploaded a bit. I've been traveling, so I've been able to. Thank you so much for stopping by. Make sure to leave some suggestions in the comments about what I should build next. Anyways, let's get into the video. The first story is called My Mushroom Experience. Alright, so I've never shared my story about shrooms online, but figured I would because it was pretty interesting. Figure if anyone is interested in trying them, this could give them an interesting perspective. For context, I've only microdosed in the past, so this was a big step up for me. So this happened a bit ago now, but my friends and I had planned a shroom night in one of their dorms. We all got together, ate pizza, and just hung out. When taking mine, I had definitely too much. I put it on my pizza. I think there were about 3 full mushrooms on it. Ate the pizza and waited. After eating it, I laid on the floor and was using my friend's weighted blanket and was super comfy. I had my now ex-boyfriend next to me, and I was just talking. About 20 minutes after we took them, I started to notice some interesting designs. When I closed my eyes, they were extremely vivid. The best way I can describe it was like looking into a neon kaleidoscope. I looked over at my friend and said, I'm feeling them, and then went back to laying down, now keeping my eyes closed to watch it happen. What I was seeing in my mind interested me so much, however, because I cannot picture things in my head. I can imagine the shape and what color, but I physically cannot imagine or picture it. However, I still have extremely vivid dreams. As the night went on, I just kept my eyes closed. Watching it all happen, it was really wild. I definitely fell asleep at some point because I feel like there was a large time skip, despite the fact that I was still seeing the kaleidoscope designs in my brain. At one point, I looked over at my ex and started telling him what I was seeing. The lighting was very dim, so it definitely didn't help, but everyone's faces were on sideways, like their nose was where their ear should be, and nothing on the right side of their faces was there. As we kept talking, I asked, "Have I been talking this whole time?" And he stupidly replied, "No," and I lost it. Vist ever felt so scared in my entire life. My stomach dropped harder than it ever had, and briefly started to cry before he realized what he did and told me I had. Then I started to laugh about it. After a minute, I laid back down and watched the ceiling. It was concrete, so there was some texture to it, but I was seeing these silhouettes of lizards patterned across it. After a bit longer, my friend decided she wanted to sleep, so everyone left. But at this point, I was so in my head that I could barely keep my eyes open and function. It had to have been like 5 minutes just to put my shoes on. Eventually, we left her room and began down the hall back to my building. I felt absolutely weightless, like I wasn't even walking. It almost felt like I could just lift my legs and float down the hall. Unfortunately, I only made it about 4 doors down before I realized I was going to throw up. I very quickly ran to the washroom and had the displeasure of throwing up 2 to 3 slices of pizza. I didn't drink any water, so it was purely food. Once that was over, we finished the walk back to my room. I decided to stop in the washroom, and staring at the tiles on the floor, everything was fractals and was slowly spinning. It was super interesting to watch, and I did for a few minutes. I wasn't brave enough to look in the mirror, but I really wish that I had. Eventually, I got back to my room, and upon walking in, I asked my ex, "Did I leave my music playing?" And he replied, "No, there wasn't anything playing." But I could perfectly hear "Is There Something I Should Know" by Duran Duran playing. Wasn't an issue, though at the time, I was obsessed with that song. I laid down in bed and looked around my room. My curtain looked like the top parts were swapping places. I also had posters on my walls, like some of classic art pieces, and they were moving in such crazy ways. I also have one of those IKEA lamps with multiple lamps attached that can be moved, and it looked like they were swaying. I closed my eyes and began to watch the patterns again, but this time it was quite overwhelming, and I remembered having to tell myself to go into my box where everything was smaller and more condensed. This really helped me calm down for some reason. Eventually, it started to wear off, and things were making more sense again and moving a lot less. Plus, the music stopped, which I didn't mind in the first place. Passed out after a bit longer and woke up the next morning feeling good. Since then, I've done them one other time, and it was interesting. It definitely took too many and almost cried while watching Superbad LOL. I would recommend not taking too many. And start off in small doses for the first few times. That definitely helped ease my body into the feeling. Otherwise, I would have been extremely overwhelmed with what I was feeling the whole time. Since then, I've been wanting to have a similar experience, but haven't had the best opportunities to. Hopefully, in the future, I can report back on another cool experience. The second story today is called A Clueless Homeschooled Kid. Thinking about this one time when I was in Boulder and had broken 4 of the 6 strings on my guitar over the course of half a week or so. I can make money with as little at 3 strings playing on the sidewalk, but 2 just ain't happening. So I scribbled this shitty little sign on the back of my notebook that said, "Need money for strings," and posted it up at an intersection by the park with my busted ass guitar. I made $5 straight out the gate, so I was pretty close to enough for a pack of strings. I was new to the game, so flying a sign was still pretty embarrassing / nerve-wracking, especially when you got to stand there with a pretty girl at the front of the line. So of course, this freaking smoking hot chick in a shiny red Audi 4A convertible pulls up to the light, and I see her reading my sign. I'm just standing there, trying to summon the powers of invisibility, and she smiles real big at me and waves me over. She tells me to hop in. She's got a job offer for me, and if I'm not interested, she'll circle back around and drop me back off at the spot. So I throw my guitar and pack in the backseat and get in. She gives me the pitch, which is that she's an escort and usually has a guy there with her as a bodyguard while she's with clients. I was honestly pretty tough looking back then, LOL. But he had called off at the last minute, and she already had a few clients lined up for that day, and asked if I'd be interested in just hanging around looking mean while they were around. Only thing was, I was a young, dumb 20-year-old who was sheltered and homeschooled my whole life and had just moved out of a Christian intentional living community called, and was so naive that I didn't know what an escorts was. I just saw the cool car and assumed she was going to be escorting people around town in her shiny red convertible. God, it sounds so stupid thinking about it now, LOL. The deal was, I get $20 per each of her clients, and she had 4 clients lined up, 1 hour per client. So I'm like, 4 hours, $80, hell yeah. Well, cut to, we're halfway up the mountain out of town, when through the course of conversation, I've realized through context what I'd signed up for. So after an hour or so, we arrive at this big-ass 2-story log cabin mansion. Like a real hoity-toity floor-to-ceiling windows, chandelier in the living room type place. She showed me around the first floor, including where there was a 38 snub-nose revolver in a drawer and a wooden barrel out back in the garage with like 10 baseball bats and a handful of machetes in it. She said none of the other bodyguards had ever had to use any of it. It made me a pitcher of margaritas and gave me the remote to the TV. On the way up the mountain, she'd been doing lines of Oxy back when it was that good. So, though she was way high by the time we got there. She went upstairs to get ready. And after a little while, she came back down the spiral staircase in this tiny little green dress / bodysuit type thing with big white polka dots all over it. And it comes up to me and says, "Do I look okay?" Does a little spin and steps up like 1 inch away from my body. I was so frazzled and all hot and bothered because in my mind I was like, this is a sin I'm sinning. Anyway, her first client showed up and they went upstairs and did the thing. And I just hung out feeling this weird mixture of needing to be the protector and also feeling super guilty for being complicated in a sinful act. When he left and before the second client showed up, I was basically pleading with her to find some chores or something for me to do besides just sit there. She assured me it was fine, and I didn't need to do anything, but after a while she said if I wanted to, I could pull rocks out of the garden bed she was fixing to plant, so I did that. She came down after the second client and told me the guy had looked out the window and told her, "Your yard worker is pulling out those rocks one by one, by hand. He must be getting paid by the hour." To which she told him I wasn't getting paid for it at all and was just there to make sure he acted right, LOL. Which he did. The last 2 clients canceled after a couple hours of making her wait, and she told me about how a lot of the guys she works with are on a power trip kink And wasting her time and withholding the money was a form of control that they get off on. So at the end of the day, I ended up with just the $40 instead of the $80 I was expecting, which alleviated some of the guilt I was feeling because the source of the guilt had shifted from the guilt of sin to sympathy for this kind lady who was only a few years older than me, being fucked with by some rich dudes with plenty of time and money that wanted her to feel powerless and waste time that was valuable to her livelihood. She was nodding off on the drive back down the mountain into town, which was scary as fuck. And when she dropped me back off near the Pearl Street Mall where I could get my guitar strings and keep busking, I wanted to give her a hug, but I knew that wasn't the thing to do. But getting back out of the car, walking up the creek to go sleep behind the library, I had a damn good sense of respect for sex workers and a new perspective of happiness with my position in life. The human existence is an ugly, delicious pot of soup, and we all in it. Our next story is called I Was an English Teacher in Southeast Asia. Now I have survivor's guilt. Before I start things off here, let me just get something out in the open. This is not a story I can tell with absolute clarity. If anything, the following will read more like a blog post than a well-told story. Even if I was a natural storyteller, which I'm not because of what unfolds in the following experience, my ability to tell it well is even more limited. But I will try my best. I used to be an English language teacher, which they call in the States ESL, and what they call back home in the UK TEFL. Once uni was over and done with, to make up for never having a gap year for myself, I decided rather than teaching horrible little shites in the mother country, I would instead travel abroad, exploring one corner of the globe and then the other, all while providing children with the opportunity to speak English in their future prospects. It's not a bad life being a TEFL teacher. You get to see all kinds of amazing places, eat amazing food, and not to mention, the girls love a rich white foreigner. By this point in my life, the countries I'd crossed off the bucket list included a year in Argentina, 6 months in Madagascar, and 2 pretty great years in Hong Kong. When deciding on where to teach next, I was rather adamant on staying in Southeast Asia. Because let's face it, there's a reason every backpacker decides to come here. It's a bloody paradise. I thought of maybe Brunei or even Cambodia, but quite honestly, the list of places I could possibly teach in this part of the world was endless. While having slept on it for a while, I eventually chose Vietnam as my next destination, as this country in particular seemed to pretty much have everything. Mountains, jungles, tropical beaches, etc. I know Thailand has all that too, but let's be honest. Everyone goes to Thailand. Well, turning my sights to the land where Charlie don't surf, I was fortunate to find employment almost right away. I was given a teaching position in central Vietnam, right where the DMZ used to be. The school I worked at was located by a beach town, and let me tell you, this beach town was every backpacker's dream destination. The beach has pearl white sand, the sea a turquoise blue. Plus, the local rent and cuisine is ridiculously reasonable. Although Vietnam is full of amazing places to travel, when you live in a beach town like this that pretty much crosses everything off the list, there really wasn't any need for me to see anywhere else. Yes, this beach town definitely has its flaws. There's rodents almost everywhere. Cockroaches are bad, but mosquitoes are worse. And as beautiful as the beach is here, there's garbage floating in the sea and sharp metal or plastic hiding amongst the sand. But having taught in other developing countries prior to this, a little garbage wasn't anything new. Or should I say, a lot of garbage. Well, since I seem to be rambling on a bit here about the place I used to work and live, let me try and skip ahead to why I'm really sharing this experience. As bad as the vermin and garbage is, what is perhaps the biggest flaw about this almost idyllic beach town is that in the inland jungle just outside of it, tourists are said to supposedly go missing. A bit of local legend here, but apparently in this jungle there's supposed to be an unmapped trail. Not a hiking trail, just a trail. And among the hundreds of tourists who come here each year, many of them have been known to venture on this trail, only to then vanish without a trace. Yeah, that's where I lived. In fact, tourists have been disappearing here so much that this jungle is now completely closed off from the public. Although no one really knows why these tourists went missing in the first place, there is a really creepy legend connected to this trail. According to superstitious locals, or what I only heard from my colleagues in the school, there is said to be creatures that lurk deep inside the jungle. Creatures said to abduct anyone who wanders along the unmapped trail. As unsettling as this legend is, it's obviously nothing more than just a legend. Like the Loch Ness Monster, for example. When I tried prying as to what these creatures were supposed to look like, I only got a variation of answers. Some said the creatures were hairy ape men, while others said they resembled something like lizards. Then there were those who just believed they're sinister spirits that haunt the jungle. Not that I ever believed any of this, but the fact that tourists had definitely gone missing inside this jungle, it goes without saying, but I stayed as far away from that place as humanly possible. Now, with the local legends out the way, let me begin with how this all relates to my experience. 6 or so months into working and living by this beach town, like every Friday after work, I go down to the beach to drink a few brewskis by the bar. Although I'm always meeting fellow travelers who come and go, on this particular Friday, I meet a small group of travelers who were rather extraordinary. Well, I won't give away their names because I haven't exactly asked for their permission, so I'll just call them Tom, Cody, and Enrique. These 3 travelers were fellow Westerners, like myself, Americans to be exact, and as extravagant as Americans are, or at least to a Brit like me. These 3 really lived up to the many Yankee stereotypes. They were loud, obnoxious, and way too familiar with the hallucinogens, should I call it. Well, despite all this, for some stupid reason, I rather liked them. They were thrill seekers, you see. Adrenaline junkies. Pretty much all these guys did for a living was travel the world, climbing mountains or exploring one dangerous place after another, as unappealing as this trio might seem on the outside. A little backstory here, but I always imagined becoming a thrill seeker myself one day, whether that be one who jumps out of airplanes or tries their luck in the Australian outback. Instead, I just became a TEFL teacher, although my memory of the following conversation is hazy at best. After sharing a beer or two with the trio, aside from being labeled a passport bro, I learned they'd just come from exploring Mount Fuji's suicide forest, and were now in Vietnam for their next big adrenaline rush. I think anyone can see where I'm going with this, so I'll just come out and say it. Tom, Cody, and Enrique had come to Vietnam, among other reasons, not only to find the trail of missing tourists, but more importantly, to try and survive it. Apparently, it was for a vlog. After first declining their offer to accompany them, I then urgently insist they forget about the trail altogether, and instead find their thrills elsewhere. After all, having lived in this region for more than half a year, I was far more familiar with the cautionary tales than they were. Despite my insistence, however, the 3 Americans appeared to just laugh and scoff in my face, taking my warnings as nothing more than limey cowardice. Feeling as though I've overstayed my welcome, I leave the trio to enjoy their night, as I felt any further warnings from me would be met on deaf ears. I never saw the Americans again after that. While I went back to teaching at the school, the 3 new friends I made undoubtedly went exploring through the jungle to find the legendary trail, all warnings and dangers considered. Now that I think back on it, I really should have reported them to the local authorities. You see, when I first became a TEFL teacher, one of the first words of advice I received was that travelers should always be responsible wherever they go. And if these Americans weren't willing to be responsible on their travels, then I at least should have been responsible on my end. Well, not to be an unreliable narrator or anything, I think that's the right term for it. But when I said I never saw Tom, Cody, or Enrique again, that wasn't entirely accurate. It wasn't wrong per se, but it wasn't accurate. No more than, say, a week later, and during my lunch break, one of my colleagues informs me that a European or American traveler had been brought to the hospital, having apparently crawled his way out from the jungle. The very same jungle where this alleged trail is supposed to be. Believing instantly this is one of the 3 Americans. As soon as I finished work that day, I quickly make my way up to the hospital to confirm whether this was true. Well, after reaching the hospital and somehow talking my way past the police and doctors, I was then brought into a room to see whoever this tourist was. And let me tell you, the sight of them will forever haunt me for the rest of my days. What I saw was Enrique, laying down in a hospital bed, covered in blood, mud, and God knows what else. But what was so haunting about the sight of Enrique was he no longer had his legs. Where his lower thighs, knees, and the rest should have been, all I saw were blood-stained bandages. But as bad as the sight of him was, the smell was even worse. Oh God, the smell. Enrique's room smelled like charcoaled meat that had gone off, as well as what I always imagined gunpowder would smell like. You see, Enrique, Cody, and Tom, they went and found the trail inside the jungle. But it wasn't monsters or anything else of the sort that was waiting for them. In all honesty, it wasn't really a trail they found at all. It was a bloody minefield. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but when I first moved to Vietnam, I was given a very clear and stern warning about the region's many dangers. You see, the Vietnam War may have ended some 50 years ago. And yet, regardless, there are still hundreds of thousands of mines and other explosives buried beneath the country. Relics from a past war silently waiting for a next victim. Tom and Cody were among these victims. It seems even now like some sort of bad joke. Americans are still dying in Vietnam. It's a cruel kind of irony, isn't it? It goes without saying, but that's what happened to the missing tourists. They ventured into the jungle to follow the unmapped trail, and the mines got them. But do you know the worst part of it? The local authorities always knew what was in that jungle, even before the tourists started to go missing. They always knew, but they never did or said anything about it. Do you want to know why? I'll give you a clue. Money. Tourist money speaks louder than mines ever could. I may not have died in that jungle. I may not have had my legs blown off like Enrique. But I do have to live on with all this. I have to live with the image of Enrique's mutilated body. The smell of his burnt, charcoaled flesh. Honestly, the guilt is the worst part of it all. The guilt that I never did anything sooner.